frequency 93.7. Signal strong, world gone quiet. Outriders on the air. Right. Okay. This is Radio Free Nowhere, broadcasting on frequency 93.7 megahertz. You're listening with the Outrider. The signal's cleaner than I expected anyway. This place might be older than disco, but she still talks if you coax her right. First official broadcast. At least I think so. I haven't found any logs left behind. Just dust, claw marks, and one set of very empty boots. So, I'm not big on names. Not mine, not yours. Doesn't really matter much anymore. Used to once, you know? Now, you keep your name quiet, your head lower, and your boots moving. Still, I figured if anyone's out there, living, breathing, listening, maybe you'd want to know you're not the only damn voice left in the dark. I don't know how long this set will last. This gear's old. Real old. Some of it hums like it's haunted. But I've got a mic, I've got a static, and that's more than most. So some ground rules before we start. If you can transmit, use channel 93.7. Short burst, no real names, and God, no coordinates. If you want to share migration routes, supply caches, or sightings, I'll pass it along. No politics, no begging, no threats. This station is not a safe house. I don't care if you've got 5 mouths to feed or just want to talk. I'm not your savior. I'm just your echo. Now, let's go ahead and listen to some music to brighten up that day. Bringing you, I guess, hits. I don't know much about the music in this station. Hopefully you enjoy it. This is Radio Free Nowhere. If you can hear this, you're not the only one left. And now, reporting from our weather station, it's Outrider with the weather for the day. Well, good morning, survivors. Assuming you still know what morning is without power, clocks, or any will to live. It's July 21st, and today's forecast for our lovely slice of former civilization is hot. Real hot. High at 92, humidity thick enough to make a corpse sweat, if they could. Expect that clinging kind of heat that sticks to your skin like dried blood. UV index? Who the hell knows? But if you're sunburned enough to start peeling, maybe the dead will think you're one of them. Bonus. There's a slight chance of a thunderstorm this evening. Maybe it'll wash the stench off Main Street. Maybe it'll just make the mosquitoes worse. Either way, don't stand under any old trees. We all know lightning doesn't kill you fast enough to matter anymore, but a falling branch might do the trick. So slap on some expired sunscreen, wrap your head in a wet rag, and try to survive another day out there. Remember, if it's raining, you're still breathing. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that little musical interlude. Now on to our daily zombie sit rep. Movement was light today. Well, maybe I've just stopped looking too hard. They're not the same as they were in the beginning. Slower. Smarter. God, maybe I'm just more tired. They don't make noise like they used to. They wait. They listen. They watch. So don't talk unless you have to. Don't whistle. And for the love of what's left, don't bring a damn dog. So, I had a crow land on my antenna this morning. Watched me the whole time I brewed my coffee. Made me wonder what's going on. What's going through its head. Does it miss the noise? Or is it just glad the roads are empty now? I used to think silence was peace. God. Turns out, too much of it starts to wear on man. After that cheery thought, why don't I cue up some music? Give us all something to remember the world by. And now, it's everyone's favorite segment, because it's the only one of its kind, literally, intercepts from nowhere. I did the military thing a long time, long enough to know when something doesn't sound right. The emergency broadcast system's still chugging along, bless its cold, automated heart. Static, weather, alerts, and the occasional, shall we say, unintended transmission. Got one last night. Woke me up. They don't usually come through this frequency or this clear, but there it was. Male voice, clipped, military cadence, like someone forgot to mute the mic or wanted to be heard.
Sector 9 remains compromised. Do not attempt evac. Repeat, all evac corridors are blocked. Advise containment. Civilian assets terminated.
Then, there's a pause. You can hear something in the background. Not moaning, not screaming, just movement. And then someone, a second voice, whispering, "They're listening." And it cuts. Now, I've got a theory, because we love theories out here in the wasteland, don't we? My guess? Not all these transmissions are accidental. Some of them, they're trying to reach us. Maybe someone behind a desk who still gives a damn. Maybe a grunt with a headset and a conscience. Who knows? But either way, I'm keeping the dial tuned. Someone's out there. And until I know who, I'll be right here listening. Well, that's about all the time I can afford to spend broadcasting. Fences to patrol, gardens to weed, books to read, and booze to drink. You know, the usual. Still breathing, still broadcasting, still no sign of anything better. If you're hearing this, I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Same frequency, different ghosts. Until then, keep your boots dry, keep your thoughts quiet, and don't waste bullets on the ones who don't deserve it.